They see our broken public education system. They see that it's very worrisome, that test scores are horrible, that things aren't going well. But they're like, well, the Republican guy said something about DEI, so let's just continue the choo-choo train of failure off a cliff with Chris Reykdal. This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I'm down 37 pounds on the program, and I lost most of that in just 2 months. Do what I did and what so many other undivided viewers have done. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. I suppose I shouldn't be shocked anymore that we've lost the Seattle Times editorial board. For a while, the Seattle Times, like the news entity, the news side of things, they've been far gone for a very long time in terms of being completely beholden to the Democratic Party, to progressive ideas, etc. But for a while, the Seattle Times editorial board was like, okay, every once in a while they'd have a glimpse of independence, of moderacy, be a little more pro-business, a little more pro-public safety, but they're completely gone now, completely captured. I don't know if it's because they really want the tax breaks that Bob Ferguson is going to give them or what it is, but they absolutely, and this one I think is the most egregious example, I was upset with their endorsement of Bob Ferguson in the governor's race, and why do I care, right? Let's start with that. Why do I care? I care because I think that there is a segment of voters who will look at endorsements in the Seattle Times and not look at anything else and make a decision based on that. So that's the first reason I care. And in races where things are close, yeah, I do believe it can make a difference. The second reason I care is because the media is supposed to hold the government accountable. Even opinion media, especially opinion media, I guess, is supposed to hold the government accountable for failures. And we have, the editorial board and us, we have a little more wiggle room to be able to tell elected leaders exactly how we feel about the job that they've done. We do that all the time. We use that wiggle room quite often. And so, you've got the news side of things, and they're supposed to cover things. Doesn't mean they can't hold elected leaders accountable. They should be doing that, but you're not going to see them taking opinions on races, etc. We don't want them to do that. But on the editorial side, they can. And it just drives me nuts that you have a major newspaper like the Seattle Times, an editorial wing that has the power and the influence to be able to hold elected leaders accountable, and they just choose to do the opposite. Over and over and over again, they choose to do the opposite. They choose to serve the Democratic Party and the party in power over the best interest of the state, the citizens in the state, and in this case, over the best interest of our kids. So the Seattle Times has issued a new endorsement in the race for superintendent of public instruction. But I feel like I need to give you a little bit of context here. So going into the primary election, there were 3 main candidates. There was Chris Reykdal, who is, of course, the incumbent. He is the current head, has been for 8 years, of our state's public school system. And then there was another, it's nonpartisan, but another like Democrat, let's call it, in Reed Saris, who they ended up endorsing over David Olson in the on the Republican side of things. And they went with Reed Saris because explicitly at the time they weren't happy and said they weren't happy with the state of our public education system. So this was from June 9th, so a couple months before the primary election. They said only 35% of low-income kids in Washington are reading at grade level. Even fewer can handle math. Those results would be unacceptable anywhere, but in a state where the economy is powered by science and technology and where 47% of students qualify as low income, the implications are ominous. Rather than confronting these facts, Chris Reykdal minimizes problems and offers excuses. So back in June, that was what the Seattle Times editorial board said in its decision not to endorse the incumbent, Chris Reykdal, because our public school system is in shambles. Test scores are in the toilet. Our attendance is in the toilet. And there's schools that are dealing with budgetary issues because they took advantage of all this money during the pandemic, planned poorly, and now they're dealing with all the consequences of it. So again, I don't know if I'm shocked. Disappointed is more accurate, but Reed Saris didn't make it through the primary election. David Olson, the more conservative candidate, or the candidate preferred by conservatives and probably moderates at this point. And Chris Reykdal, the incumbent, made it through. So the Seattle Times editorial board decided, well, let's reassess things. The guy we endorsed didn't make it through. So they came out with their endorsement in this race today. And who do they endorse? But the incumbent, Chris Reykdal. After they said just 2 months ago that he's minimizing all the problems, he's just offering excuses, he's not taking accountability or responsibility for the state of our public school system. But now that it's him versus a quote-unquote Republican, we can't do that. So let's just choose the guy and tell our readers to choose the guy who has run our public education system into the ground. It's insane. I got to read a big chunk of this for you. It boggles the mind. They said this is the endorsement of Chris Reykdal. Anyone with even a passing interest in education understands there is widespread dissatisfaction with Washington's public school system. Its status quo of lackluster student outcomes and spiraling fiscal problems were major reasons for this editorial board's reluctance to endorse 8-year incumbent Chris Reykdal for another term as state superintendent of public instruction. Okay, so again, they're starting it by basically saying, there's all these issues with the public school system. So that's why 2 months ago, pre-primary, we were very reluctant to endorse Chris Reykdal. But they go on to say, initially, challenger David Olson presented qualities that suggested he might bring a new brand of sorely needed leadership to public education. However, information has come to light that changes the equation. And I'm thinking, well, what information? Did he do something wrong? Like, does he have skeletons in the closet? What is it? Oh, no, he just doesn't support DEI. They said in April at the Washington Republican Party convention, Olson bragged that he'd led the, quote, first school board in the state to ban controversial social issues like critical race theory, DEI, and all that horrible stuff, end quote. And that's a bad thing? They say, shockingly, he went on to say that if every high school graduate opted for the skilled trades instead of pursuing a 4-year degree, universities, quote, could all go bankrupt, and that would save America. The Seattle Times says, this is disqualifying. Washington cannot have a schools chief who advocates for the end of higher education. At least Reykdal doesn't pose a danger to certain curricula or to higher education itself. That leaves Reykdal as the only legitimate candidate. We are endorsing him for re-election with the fervent hope that he will up his game and provide the muscular leadership needed to right Washington's education system. The numbers are dire and surprising for a state whose economy is built largely around science, technology, and intellectual innovation. Let's let that sink in for a second. Because one of the things that strikes me, there's no law, there's no mandate that the Seattle Times editorial board has to choose anyone. If you really don't like what David Olson said about DEI and critical race theory and trying to get more kids into the skilled trades, which is a very good idea, if that is so disqualifying to you, you don't have to endorse anyone. You certainly don't have to endorse the guy who's been in charge of the public education for 8 years during a period that you say in the same sentence and breath that you endorsed him, during a period that has sown widespread dissatisfaction with the public school system, has achieved lackluster student outcomes and spiraling fiscal problems. Think about that. The editorial board of the state's newspaper of record dislikes Republicans so much or is so beholden to Democrats that they see our broken public education system. They see that it's very worrisome, that test scores are horrible, that things aren't going well. But they're like, well, the Republican guy said something about DEI, so let's just continue the choo-choo train of failure off a cliff with Chris Reykdal. I mean, really, help me understand that, Ed Board. It's baffling to me. Why? And it reminds me of the Bob Ferguson endorsement. We said this at the time. So they come out pre-primary and they endorse Bob Ferguson for governor in a story where they say all these bad things about him. They said, gosh, I'll just revisit it. The editorial board makes this decision with caveats. The good Bob Ferguson is smart, hardworking, and fearless. The other Bob Ferguson can occasionally appear petty, pushy, and overly ambitious. To wit, before he had a change of heart, Ferguson initially refused to disclose the names of donors when he transferred their political contributions from his past attorney general campaigns to his gubernatorial campaign. He also faced blowback for allegedly pressuring the Secretary of State to rearrange the primary ballot to clear up confusion after two other people with his name filed to run for governor. And they went on and on from there about all the areas where Bob Ferguson has to prove that he's going to be a good governor. When he's been the attorney general for 12 years, they've knocked him on a bunch of things. And then they're like, well, Republicans bad, so we're just going to endorse Bob Ferguson. Why not endorse no one? Why not, as the newspaper of record that is supposed to exist to hold powerful people accountable, say, no, these guys have been in government long enough and they have not done well. They've had all these issues. So no, we're not going to endorse. We might not endorse the Republican because we can't do that. And then the Antifa will show up at the Seattle Times and burn it to the ground. So we can't do that. So they're like, well, we'll just, let's just endorse him. And maybe Bob Ferguson will get us some of those tax cuts we desperately need. And, people won't call us right wing. So let's just go with that. But, it's one thing to say like politics before kids. Think about what's happening in the public schools. That is the Seattle Times editorial board saying they are willing to put politics ahead of the education of our children. And their knocks on David Olson is because he said something that to me suggests he wants to focus on actual education, reading, writing, math. And he doesn't want to focus on race-driven curricula on DEI, which is exactly what the state public school system needs to get away from. But that's like his cardinal sin, is he's opposed to pushing DEI, which is just pushing racism on kids. So you're going to go with the guy that has tanked test scores, under his leadership. Schools are in financial peril. The Seattle Times, they're lost them.